Now the remaining thing is that we maybe want to adjust our chart, and we can adjust it in two different ways. We can either make sure that our bars here take the full available height, or that we shrink the height a little bit. And in reality, we might want to do both. I think that's too much height here, but I also want to make sure that if we have it on a slightly bigger device, we never have an empty white space at the bottom. So therefore, first of all, in the main Dart file, let's maybe give this only 30% and assign 70% to our transaction list. And now let's still make sure that our chart bars are positioned properly. And now to also make sure that our bars are sized dynamically, let's go to our chart bar. And there I have a fixed height for my text above the bar. That might be fine. But the bar itself, we can probably size that dynamically. To size this chart bar dynamically, we need to find out which available height we have. And now we're not really interested in the full device height for that. Of course, we could simply go to the main Dart file, take our calculation here, which calculates how much height we assign to our container, and copy that here into our chart bar to then take a fraction of that available chart height for our chart bar itself, so for the container between the labels. But that would mean that whenever we adjust this fraction here, we also have to adjust it here in the chart bar. So it would be nicer if we could get the information about how much space is available for this chart bar in general in here. Because if we take the Dart Dev tools, which I opened up here, which you can open through Visual Studio Code by using the command panel and then just typing Dart Dev tools, and you should find that command where you can hit enter. If you have these opened and you select the widget here with select widget mode and you click on any bar, you actually see that this is in a column here, which in the end, if you scroll up in that tree, is all in a row. And that row already takes the available height of our chart, minus some padding which we assigned. So the row already has the height, but now inside of the chart bar widget, we'd be interested in getting that height and sizing our bar here appropriately based on that height. And for that, there's another widget we can use in Flutter, and that's the LayoutBuilder widget. The LayoutBuilder widget takes one named argument which you have to provide, and that's the builder argument, which gives you two arguments then. The first is a context, so that is given to you by Flutter. You don't call that function. Flutter calls that function for you. And the second is an object with some information about the constraints which are applied to this widget you're in, so to the chart bar widget. And constraints are a feature which Flutter offers, which defines how much space a certain widget may take. Indeed, constraints are an important concept in Flutter. Constraints define how a widget is rendered on the screen, and you set constraints by, for example, assigning a height or a width, or otherwise, if you don't set this, all built-in Flutter widgets have their own default constraints. Like, for example, a list view has an infinite amount of height, a column also has that, but is not scrollable, and so on. Constraints always refer to height and width, and are expressed as a minimum and a maximum height and width you might have on a given widget. And you can set them on your own, as I just said, or there are some sensible defaults in Flutter. Now, thus far, we implicitly always use these constraints when we assign different heights or widths, or when we used expanded to make sure that a widget takes all the space it can get in a column or in a row. Now, the layout builder gives us information about the constraints that are applied to this widget we're in, so to the chart bar. No matter if we explicitly set these constraints by assigning a size on some parent widget, or if these are the default constraints of the built-in widget we're placing our widget in. No matter what it is, constraint is, or constraints, is actually an object with some information about the constraints that apply. And in here, in that builder, we should now return the widget tree for our custom widget. So basically what we hit in there before, the column in this case, I return this inside of the builder function. But now we have the constraints object available, and we can use that to dynamically calculate the height and width, if we need it, of elements inside of that widget based on the constraints, so of the sizing that is applied to our custom widget from outside. So here we could take the constraints on that height here by accessing constraints.maxHeight. So that's the maximum height this may take, or our entire chart bar may take, and maybe give the bar itself 70% off that. Now, as we can see, this is a bit too big here. Let me actually clear that select mode here. So this is a bit too big because, of course, here we also have like a fixed height label, then a fixed height spacing, more fixed height spacing, and another text. So the best solution here might be to assign dynamically calculated heights to all these elements so that they add up to 1. So we could say this should maybe be 60% of the available height. This first text here maybe gets 15%. Then here this height gets only 0.5, so 5%. Same down here for this spacing, gets also 5%. And then this text at the bottom, I'll also wrap this in a container, just as I did it for my text up there. And also give this a height of, let's say, 15%. Now with that I have 30% for the two texts together, 10% for the spacing here, and the remaining 60% for my app bar container. Now one last thing I want to do, the text at the bottom here, I'll also wrap this in a fitted box now to ensure that if for some reason we should be on a very small device or we should have only very little height available, the text is automatically resized to still fit into that box. And with that now we have a chart that fills that space perfectly, dynamically calculated on the chart size, where the chart size, so the overall box, is also dynamically calculated based on the screen height. And therefore now if we rotate this, this looks ugly, we will fix that. But now we ensure that this is all squeezed onto one screen here as well, which right now is broken, but at least we fixed that problem that we have fixed heights that might or might not look good. Now here we're working with relative heights, which as you can see is still not perfect here, but which is a great step forward to make sure that at least on portrait mode, stuff is working correctly, and we'll also of course make sure that it works on landscape mode.